I don't want to say it was by accident, but I mean, I had gone to college. My major was anthropology, and I really was all into like, I'm going to go study people all over the world. Actually, my concentration was Native Americans. I really love that. Their culture, especially Southwest. But, I don't know, economy and whatnot. And I was out of college a couple of years, and a lot of people were like, you'd be a good teacher. I'm like, no, because I just remember my high school experience being like, I went to North Allegheny, so, a little iffy. Anyhow, and I had just moved from Puerto Rico, totally traumatic. It was a whole thing. So I was like, I'm not going back to, to high school, blah, I hated it. So then I ended up becoming a preschool teacher for 2 years, and I liked like that kind of rhythm of it, but I really, like 5-year-olds are a little bit, I wanted to have discuss or talk about things that I really thought were, kind of cool and important and whatnot. And trust me, preschool teachers, they rock. But also I wasn't making any money. So I ended up going, that's why, and I'm like, fine. If everybody says I should, so.
When you were a student, who was your favorite teacher?
I had a couple really good favorite teachers. Both of them were social studies teachers, actually 3. Oh my gosh, now I'm thinking. I just found what they talked about really super interesting, and they were always very animated. I mean, obviously I went to school in the 70s. And a lot of it was like rote learning, and it was just like open the book, read it, answer questions. But when I went to school in a military base at Fort Buchanan, Mr. DeBerry was, first of all, I think he was one of my first American teachers that I had. And he had been in the military, and it was 1976. And he had been part of the civil rights movement, so he always would talk about that, and I just found that super duper fascinating. That's some of my favorite. Then I had, oh my gosh, now I forget, but he was for many years a world cultures teacher at North Allegheny. He was also excellent. So I think they really inspired me. They're like, you know what? I thought that they instilled in me a love for learning. So I think that I could, maybe do them proud.
Share your teaching experience. What grades did you teach, and where, and how long?
Well, I told you about preschool. Fun story, 15 years later, I had 2 students in my class that I had taught at preschool, but they were 2. They did not remember me. I actually did my student teaching here in Fox Chapel. It was an internship, and then they hired me the next year because somebody moved. So my entire, career was here. I taught 9th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade at different times. Mostly, though, the majority of it was in 12th grade, too, but because some of the classes were all levels. But mostly it was 11th grade that I taught.
Tell me about your favorite lesson, unit, or activity that you taught during the year.
There were a lot. I don't know. I'm like, people always talk about the beatnik project, or the beatnik class, because you got to, kind of do everything different. Everything was you don't do anything that you would normally do during a school day, or during a regular class. So that was fun. I really liked, in sociology, I really liked socialization was one of my favorite topics. And how you become a student. So anytime we watch a video like feral children, or what happened to the triplets, and weird story, and you would have a connection. Sometimes they were really emotional, when I talked about the Vietnam War, that was super emotional because my husband's a veteran of the Vietnam War, so I was like, am I going to start crying? Sorry. I cry a lot. And that's one of the things that I always thought was important, because we also talked about how in American society you can show happiness and maybe anger, although women showing anger is a thing, is a not thing, or being fired up, but showing other emotions make people uncomfortable. It's part of my thing. I really wanted to do try to make people say it's okay. I mean, everybody feels stuff. But I also love when we went around telling our stories, because, stories is how people connect to you. Oh my gosh, I think I almost peed my pants. It was your class, Alex. I don't know, do you remember? Were you there that day when we told our stories, when the things they carry? It's we carry stories, and that's how we make sense of the world. I was laughing so hard at the stories you guys were telling. I don't know. Those are all my favorite ones.
Yeah. Well, you have like a very personal connection with all your units and your lessons that you taught, which really made the class special.
Right, and then with sociology, it's the same thing
Yeah.
too. It was just because it was, I don't know, it was really meaningful. Like,
Yeah.
and I really think studying anthropology was like studying like how understand how people live and how people make sense of the world, and that was so important to me. Even like at the end, you know, like I was just like, I just think this is really important. It just like, you know, like people matter. You know, people might forget your name, but in the end, people really matter. I think that's hugely important. And any time that students would tell me something about themselves, I just felt really, I was like, wow, like, you know, really honored for that. Because, you know, you don't, people sometimes you know them 30 years and you don't know anything about them. And for somebody to trust you enough to share that, that's hugely important. And I would never ask you to do something that I couldn't do myself. So if I was going to tell you like, well, this was really hard for me, or I think I showed you my like, I don't know, like when my dad passed, he had kept all these things. But of course for me, he had kept like the note that the teacher had sent home, like Deanna failed like her last test or what. And she said she studied the wrong chapter. And so it's like, dude, I've used those excuses too. And I totally like failed out trigger. You know, so it's not like, I'm not perfect. And I remember kind of like what it was like, you know, even though things are very different. I know that's another story, so.
Well, you kind of already touched on this. What was your funniest or most entertaining memory from the classroom?
I mean, really, there are so many. There are so many times, at least once a semester in every class, maybe not every class, but in most classes, I had to go out in the hall because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like laugh crying, you know, like I would laugh cry. And sometimes it was just the dumbest thing. Somebody would say something and it would just do that. So you know, definitely that day that you guys were telling stories, I was laugh crying. I just I couldn't help it.
Do you remember what the story was from last year?
I think it was another student telling a story about, which the student never really talked a lot about himself in class, but he just started telling all these stories of like things he did when he was a little kid, and it was just outrageous. Yeah. Remember that?
I do remember now. Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like outrageous, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like these things, like what? And then one, like at the end, and I don't know, I mean, like what, I'm not gonna say it because what happens in 268 stays in 268, but just like at the end, they just said one thing and I just lost it. I was like, oh my gosh. So that was, yeah, that's one of them. There are many, many stories.
During your time as a teacher, what was the biggest change you witnessed?
I think I know, and I'm like, the biggest change would definitely have to be the use of the cell phones, and it's not just like smartphones, like the iPhone. I think I always tell you guys like, it was maybe around 2011, 2010, somewhere in the early 2010s, whatever, that we used to have. It was like a TV class, and they would have announcements in between first and second period. And it was like, I don't know, 15 minutes of announcements. They would do like the news and announcements, whatever, and like the weather. So kind of like to, you know, model what an actual newscast would be. And they would always tell us at the beginning of the school year, make sure the kids are paying attention, you know, like that. I mean, they didn't quite say it like that, but you know how they always tell us, like, do these things. You know that. So it's like, this is what you, and so it was a constant battle because, you know, you just taught them for 80 minutes and what they want to do. You want to talk to your friend that you haven't been able to talk to for 80 minutes or whatnot. Or you wanted to go visit your friend in another classroom during that time period, you know, so on and so forth. But I remember just, it was like so weird. The first time, I think more than half of the students had smartphones that you could text and things and go back. Like for the first time, like I was like ready to like, okay, kids, you're not supposed to be talking now. And there was complete silence because they were all like on their phone. And so I think that's one of the things that, trust me, I love my smartphone, no complaints. But I think like they just became like so much more like, this is where I want to be and not here. So I think it's harder to like talk to people you don't know, to make new friends. And I think that that's the biggest change that I see. Obviously, it's great to you don't have to use encyclopedias to look up things. It's we can Google it. It's awesome. And there's always videos and things like that. But I think that I think teaching and learning is about the human connection. I mean, the entire 30, or however long I was teaching, it was about, I learned so much from my students, so it was constant, I think, reciprocity. But I think a lot of that was, a lot of it is I can't compete with social media, and even though I know when you're 25, you're oh, I wish I would have paid more attention in this class. I still have people, always ask me oh, I wish I would have paid more attention in class. I'm yeah, sometimes you don't know what you want to know until you're older, and that's normal, but I think it's harder when that's there, and I'm thinking back, how did I grow up without all this stuff, I think that that's really hard for students today, even if it's not competing with for your attention or whatever. I just think a lot of it is it's constant. Your brain is constantly getting these things, information, and I think sometimes you just need to kind of put that to the side. And I know how to do that, but it's harder for you guys.
Yeah, we grew up with it.
Yeah, it's normal. I know my grandson, he's pulls out my phone. It's photo circle. He's I'm oh my gosh, put that away. I'm you get a minute. That's it. And because I know, developmentally it's not good, but he's not looking at whatever YouTube or whatever TikTok. Although is that being banned? I don't even know. Okay. All right.
Share with me one of your classroom management strategies or tips. How did you handle challenging or disruptive students in a way that turned their behavior around?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think it really depends. I mean, to get the class quiet, there's a number of that's a normal thing. But I think for students, most of the time, they're not, unless you did something to them, they're not mad about you. It's something happening outside of the classroom. So I think the number one thing is to ask the student, hey, what's going on? Pull them aside quietly and kind of work on it one-on-one. That's much more than screaming or yelling at them in the middle of class or whatnot. Oftentimes, we have no clue. All we see is whoever you present in the classroom, which most of the time is a person just sitting there or doing something, talking to a friend. So, I mean, I didn't know, I remember one time a student, it wasn't acting out or whatever, but I sent, we're supposed to send emails, blah, blah, blah. So I sent an email and both the parents were in you can look and see who to send an email to. And both the parents were there. And when I sent them to both the parents, the dad wrote back and said his mom passed away last year. And I'm oh my gosh, and they hadn't, I know they're supposed to, but, people are people, and they forgot to remove it. It's I didn't know that, so you kind of then, it's okay, this is why. But I think, every student's different. The reasons why they're acting out, it might be something very simple, maybe they thought I didn't like him because maybe his older brother or her older brother, whatever, had me, and they didn't think I liked them either. It could be something as simple as that. I just really think talking to a person one-on-one really is the best way to kind of address those issues.
You've spent decades working with young people. What have you learned from your students?
I think one of the things that I've learned is to just how it's kind of how when you learn something new, it's you get kind of excited and it interests you so much and you want to find other stuff. So you guys have taught me a lot about new stuff that I didn't know, whether it's artists, whether it's technology, just different things that you could do. So I think kind of keep an open mind and just be interested about the world and new things, not just be stuck in your own way. But I also think young people are really passionate and about a number of things. It could be politics, it could be music, a number of things, and just not to not to lose that. It's always so, I mean, the energy of young people is incredible. Old people are not like that. I mean, we have fun, but it's kind of like we've been around the block, 6 or 7 times, like whatever, but in some ways, they're like, we're more jaded than young people. You guys are like, since everything is like, I don't know, you have your life ahead of you. And so anything is possible. So where I'm going, like, when I'm thinking like, that's never going to happen, you guys are like, oh yeah, that'll happen. And so I'm very hopeful for the future.
Can you discuss your teaching philosophy and how it guided your approach to education?
So one time when I was student teaching, I had my mentor was a guy named Phil Masalski, who also mentored Mrs. Klein. But anyhow, he was always, it's so funny because it came full circle. It's like, tell them stories. I'm like, what are you talking about? Tell them stories. I'm like, all right, Or, he would say things like, oh, if you reach 1 kid a year, you've done your job. I'm like, what? And that's at a time when we used to teach like 40-minute classes. So you'd have like maybe 130 to 150 kids a year, I was like, that's not a good thing. But the number one thing was like, have fun. If you're not having fun, and it doesn't just mean like laughing, but like having a good conversation or, watching something together that's meaningful or, doing something for them that is really going to mean something in their lives. By them, I mean students. Then what are you doing? I think I'm lucky. I think it's much easier for teachers that teach social studies because we all live in the world, and stuff affects us. And how, this happened, then therefore it's going to affect you. I give all the credit to physics teachers and, math teachers. I'm like, although I like math, and I took like physics as an undergrad for like intelligent life in the universe, the class is called. But it was taught by a physics teacher, and the way he talked about it, like, is time travel possible? So it was like, I don't know, is it? So like it can get, like they did a great job getting me interested in something that's like, I'm not super interested in math or whatnot. So I think my number one, I don't know, like my philosophy is like, if I can help students kind of expand their world just a little bit, I think that's really helpful. And whatever I needed to do within the bounds that I could do to, I always said, like, if I could, I'd take you on a trip around the world and we'd learn, because, travel is very educational most of the time. So, but if we can't do that, like, how do I make you see, like, other people's experiences, which is really hard, We know our own experience really well. It's hard to know somebody else's. I think that's really my main goal as a teacher. That's what I would say I would be. And, memorize like 50 dates, random. No. I'm kidding.
What do you think are the most important qualities of a great educator?
Flexibility, sense of humor, and just a love of learning and people, Sometimes people get into the teaching. I swear they don't like other people. I'm like, why are you here? So, and, especially young people. That's one of the biggest thing I miss is you guys. Flexibility is because things happen. Things change all the time. Disasters, something doesn't work, whatever. But also like flexibility with students. Like what works for one student might not work for the other one. So if you're like, everybody's getting treated exactly the same, it's kind of hard, like that's not fair either. So I think flexibility, I would also say kind of like, sometimes we take things, with people, we take things personal, and I think it's really important to understand, like to kind of give students the benefit of the doubt. That they're not trying to put one over on. Sometimes they are. It happens. I don't get mad usually about that, though. It's just like, it happens. We're people. But, like, to kind of give them the benefit of the doubt that they're really trying their best, and sometimes, things happen. Yeah.
What do you think was the most challenging part of being a teacher?
I would say there's 2 things, maybe 3. Definitely, I love working with people, but people can be challenging. And sometimes you're having your own issues, and it's like, ugh, it was sometimes that's hard that you're like, okay, so I don't know, you're having a fight with your friend or so-and-so didn't talk to you, and you're like, oh my gosh, but this is happening in my life. So sometimes that's hard to, you learn to like kind of just put it to the side, kind of thing, which is very good. So, and working with people is always challenging. We have misunderstandings, we see the world different. But I think that that's what makes it so good because you can overcome that. I would say all the paperwork, oh my gosh, I was so happy I don't have to grade. That's, no, because it's like, oh, that's like my Saturday or this or that, or it's like, I don't like writing comments on things because people take them personal. They're not. It's just like, nobody makes like a great, whatever, thesis sentence from the very first, and it's not a personal thing. I really am just trying to help you get better because I don't know how, maybe it's not like this anymore, but when I was in college, those professors were brutal. I said this, they're like, what the, go back to you. They would just be like, you need remediation. They never said that to me, thank goodness, but I've seen people, I was like, oh. Sometimes I just wish people, and it's hard, I know, people do that with jobs that they don't know, but I really wish people would think, like, we have the best interests of the students always. Like, I think this is something that would make them think. It's not like I want to indoctrinate them into something. I just want them to think about it, that's all.
On the other side, what was the most rewarding part of being a teacher?
The kids, yeah. And to be honest, this school, great, like, staff. Unlike the other people I work with. I know people who teach in other schools who are kind of like, different people are always fighting. I didn't see that here, definitely not in my department, and with most people, we just got along as a great staff. But always the kids. I'm like, it's just, one of the last things I did was go to graduation. So it was so nice to see people that, like, wow, like you've been here 4 years and I've seen you grow so much. They're almost like your little kids, So, and that's always, one of the things that you miss the most. It's just, because you never get to see, like what happened to them. Every once in a while, you do, you're like, oh my gosh, like, you're so-and-so, like, total sadness. But I went to a funeral one time, and one of my former students was there, and he's like, Miss Sayre, and he had become like meanwhile he had like gray hair, like, I was like, was married, had like 2 kids, but then he had become a history teacher. He's like, oh, you were one of my favorites. That's why I became a history teacher. I'm like, oh, he gave me such a hard time too. I was like, you were always sassing, so we just had a good time, talking about. So in that sense, like, wow, I'm so glad, like, like you had, like, I was, in some way, shape, or form useful. So that's always, I think, hugely important, because you have your own kids, but then it's like, to be able to do that, what a privilege. I would often sit in my classroom, and I don't know, it happened at different times, but I think like, wow, I'm getting paid to be here, talk about things I love, and listen to, and like have a conversation with young people, like, I'm so lucky. Yeah, I would think that, I don't know, numerous times during the semester. Yeah, so that was always, I think that's the best part,
Yeah. I think we felt that too in that class. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, now you're gonna make me.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I say that about all the. I loved your class.
Yeah.
No, your class was a lot of fun. You were my last class.
Last class ever.
Ever.
Yeah.
You guys were a lot of fun. There was a lot of different characters, a lot of different personalities, but it was really good that you were able, that you wanted to, to share, and you were, and I felt really lucky that you were able to say whatever, what you thought, and it wasn't like, oh,
If you could give one piece of advice to parents and the general public about the importance of teachers and education, what would it be?
I think I kind of already said that, but it's like we really do have your kids' interests at heart. All we want to do is do right by them, and just help them, even if it's just a little bit, in their path in the world. I know that family, friends, parents, you have a huge role. We're just there to help them a little bit, that we really do want them to do well and want them to succeed.
What advice would you offer a first-year teacher?
Oh, it's going to be rough. I don't take things personal. More often than not, it's really not about you. It's about what's going on in that student's life, or what happened last period. Oftentimes, especially young, because it's young teachers. You guys are not that much younger than they are, and it's hard, when something doesn't go the way they wanted it to go, like a lesson, or when a student, is just whatever, cranky and whatnot, or somebody doesn't do a homework assignment. It's probably not personal. It's probably something else going on. And that's really hard, because you love, you're so excited. You're starting your new job. You're like, yay! I'm gonna be the best teacher ever. I'm gonna be so cool. They're gonna love me. And they're like, wow, falling asleep on day one. You're like, what the heck? I stayed up all night planning this, having nightmares about teaching. Which I had 3 nightmares about teaching. The ones that are like, they come to observe you, you're not prepared, it's the wrong roster. I'm like, I retired. I thought I would retire those things, and apparently not. Okay, maybe now.
And the last question, what would you like to say to your former students who are watching?
I love you, that's all. And I hope you're all doing well. And if you ever need anything and you see me and I can help you, or you reach out to someone in this school, and definitely they know how to contact me. All good. I wish you all the best.